Good afternoon. Good afternoon, Commissioners. About a month ago, we were presented with a resolution asking our State General Assembly to petition the United States Congress for a new constitutional amendment reversing the Supreme Court's 2010 decision in Citizens United versus the Federal Elections Commission that legally defined corporations as people and money as a form of speech that cannot be regulated for the purpose of limiting corporate financing of political campaigns. I know you're very busy attending to other business of the county, and this may have just slipped your mind, but some of us have come back to remind you of this request and to report to you how this important movement has progressed since last month. Listed on the nonpartisan Move to Amend website, to date nationwide 133 resolutions and ordinances have been passed by either local governments or citizen initiative referendums demanding a constitutional amendment that reverses the Citizens United court decision. In North Carolina, the Town Board of Highlands has followed the town of Franklin, Asheville, Carrboro, Chapel Hill, and Orange County that we know of so far. Since we last approached you, the state of Vermont has joined the states of Hawaii and New Mexico in petitioning Congress for a constitutional amendment to reverse Citizens United. It is passed in the Alaska State Senate and has been introduced in the Washington State Legislature. Commissioner Cody, you asked why we hadn't also brought up the issue of labor unions donating to political campaigns, and that's a valid question. The Supreme Court's Citizens United decision only addresses the status of corporations as people, giving these entities the rights that up until now have been reserved only for human beings. This decision does not bestow a similar status upon labor unions or address this issue. Therefore, in asking for a resolution to reverse the Citizens United decision, the issue of labor union campaign contributions doesn't come into play. However, you certainly have the power and right to pass a version of this resolution that addresses the issue of labor union campaign contributions as well as corporate personhood. As elected public officials, surely you can understand why your constituents are concerned that the millions of corporate dollars pouring into political campaigns, distorting our political process, is undermining the principles that make up the foundations of our free nation. It's not supposed to be $1, one vote. It's supposed to be one person, one vote. The ability to choose our own leaders through fair and honest elections is what separates a free nation from a totalitarian state. So once again, I'm here to ask you to place this resolution on your agenda and to vote on it in your next meeting in time to be considered during the coming State General Assembly session, which convenes on May 16th. Thank you, Mr. President.
For your audience, my name is Pat Monty. I live in Silva. And what I would like to speak to is the historical context of inalienable rights. Inalienable rights are not given or granted by anyone, any document, or any government. Inalienable rights are rights that we possess because we are human. The United States Declaration of Independence states that all men are created equal and endowed by the Creator with certain inalienable rights, such as life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The Bill of Rights in the United States Constitution does not and cannot give us rights because we pre-possess those rights by virtue of being human. What our Constitution can and does is prevent the government from infringing upon our inalienable rights. Not only does our Constitution prevent government infringement, but it also gives to government the authority and the obligation to protect and defend our human individual inalienable rights against groups, organizations, including corporations, special interest nonprofits, and unions. Though this was a liberal idea at the time of the founding of our nation, today the concept of individual liberty with a limited government having only the obligations to protect and defend is the vanguard of even the most conservative. This explains why the movement to amend the Constitution to declare that humans, not corporations, are people, and that money is not speech, transcends both parties and ideologies. The idea is not right or left, conservative or liberal. At its very core, the movement to amend is a return to our nation's founding ideas and principles. It just may be the most patriotic and fundamental movement of our times. For evidence of the broad acceptance of this movement among conservatives, we can look at the recent primary elections in West Allis, Wisconsin. West Allis is a conservative Milwaukee suburb. On April 3rd, 2012, in a Republican primary ballot initiative, the people, by a 70% margin, voted to approve a resolution calling for an amendment to the U.S. Constitution to establish that humans, not corporations, are persons.
Thank you, Ms.
And that money is not speech. I'm almost done.
You have 3 minutes.
Pardon?
You have 3 minutes.
You have to stop.
Thank you.
I asked you, as Mr. Friedman did, to pass the resolution
Yes,
on.
ma'am.
Thank you.
My name is Bill Christopher, and I live a bit south and west of Cassius. You will appreciate my relative brevity. In discussing corporate personhood, it is critical that we distinguish between right and privilege. In everyday vernacular, we often commingle right and privilege. For example, driving on our public roads is an earned privilege, not a right. Too often we affirm that we have the right to drive when what we mean is we have only earned the privilege to drive. If we violate driving laws once, the privilege is granted, our privilege can be revoked. This language ambiguity, along with U.S. Supreme Court assumptions of personhood for corporations, is what courts have relied upon over the last 126 years to grant global corporations more and more rights. Actions that have usurped the so-called inalienable individual rights of we the people. To return inalienable rights to humans and award appropriate privilege to organized corporate groups is going to require an amendment to the U.S. Constitution. I am formally asking you, Commissioners of Jackson County, to pass this resolution to amend and send it to the North Carolina General Assembly, who in turn can petition the U.S. Congress to put forth an amendment to the Constitution. Congress would then send to the states for ratification the amendment that human beings, not corporations, are persons, and that money is not speech. Thank you.
Thank you.
You've already introduced me, but I thank you for the chance to speak to you this afternoon. I'm going to talk to the fact that before corporate personhood idea came along, corporations were doing very well, thank you, with the privileges that they've been granted by the states. And it might even be kind of shocking to you all to hear the very limited manner that corporations began in the early days of the Constitution.
Thank you. Thank you. Can you all, everybody hear me now? Here's some typical state regulations in the early days after 1976 in our country, and they were restrictions made by the states at that time. Corporate charters required a vote of state legislatures and could only operate in the applied to state of charter then. Stockholders had to be local, and charters were granted for a specified number of years. Charters could be dissolved once they had earned a certain profit margin. And in most states, corporations could only exist if they served the public good. Corporations could do only that for which they were chartered. They could not donate to political or charitable causes, nor could they own other corporations. And finally, there were limitations on the amount and type of land they could use. The intent of this resolution is not one of anti-corporation.
I, as a former business owner, have established both non- and for-profit corporations to conduct business affairs. Corporations are, I agree, a proper entity for conducting the business for which they were chartered. Corporate charters grant to people like me privileges to enter into contracts, sue and be sued, take out patents and copyrights, hold property titles, and through human effort, perform necessary business functions. When they are in accord with the intentions and within the privileges perceived by the founding fathers, they can contribute to economic vitality and community well-being. But since corporations began to be deemed persons and to demand human rights, they inevitably have done so to advance their own interests as they did before the colonial revolutions, to hold power like that which the founding fathers fought against. The word corporation does not appear in the Constitution, and no single piece of national, state, or local legislation exists that grants corporations personhood. Therefore, personhood has only been sanctioned by unelected and appointed for life judges. I want to recover the founding values of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness here. An amendment is what's going to be required, though, one that will protect our individual, human, and inalienable rights. I respectfully ask you, the governing board of my county, to pass this resolution, which means to put it on an agenda, I suspect, to support an amendment to the Constitution that declares human beings, not corporations, are persons, and money is not unlimited free speech. And I thank you. And as a resident of Cassius, I would certainly agree that Glenn.
Thank you very much, commissioners. My name is Madeline Watt, and I'm a resident of Cassius in Jackson County, a property owner and a homeowner. And I also agree that Glenville needs to be part. I, too, want to say why I believe that it is so important that we step up and put this on the agenda and send this resolution in. It is something that we are leaving for our grandchildren and our great-grandchildren as well as ourselves. These are things that our presidents and George Washington and Thomas Jefferson, people like that, fought so that we have rights and freedoms and representation. And I believe that we are losing it, and I believe that it is unpatriotic to not step up and talk about it. Corporate personhood rights create a two-tiered system of governance, largely because corporations have been given human rights. On one hand, we have the real industry and job creators on Main Street. On the other, we have mammoth global entities with limitless money who have no patriotism, no community interest, and no national allegiance. This allows them to control governmental bodies, to influence laws, and enforce regulations that Main Street has to abide by. They themselves then can either ignore or in some cases even be exempted from these regulations. One example of this two-tiered system is the TARP bailout and the Consumer Protection Agency that sprang from the debacle of the 2008 economic meltdown. Local banking institutions who have continued to engage in well-established, standard and acceptable banking procedures and practices have not gotten one dime of TARP funds, yet they now carry the heaviest burdens. One Macon Bank official showed us a 3-inch thick resolution manual, or regulation manual, known as the Dodd-Frank Act. He referred to this act as nothing but smoke and mirrors that distract from the real issues and that have a major impact on the monetary system. Is that 3 minutes?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you for listening.
11 items.
I'm Dr. Alan Lomax, a resident of Sylvan. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to you this afternoon. So common is the practice today for global corporations to overrun our local interests, which many of us have come to just accept as good for capitalism without questioning. Before 1776, the situation was not much different. The British Crown deliberately empowered corporations to plunder colonial resources, granting to them rights and powers far beyond that of the colonists. But the colonists were hardly complacent. We often do not realize that the Boston Tea Party was a revolt not just against the Crown and taxation without representation, but it was a revolt against the East India Trading Company, a corporate monopoly that had a monopoly on the import of tea and was largely exempted from taxation. The colonists were not as concerned about the tea tax levied on them as they were infuriated by the injustice of the unfair tax exemption for the importing corporation. We see similarities today, evidenced by the fact that the average working American today pays more in taxes than General Electric. Between 2008 and 2010, the average first responder making about $45,000 a year paid around $9,000 in annual federal taxes. General Electric earned $10 billion, paid zero income taxes, and received $4 billion in subsidies, and paid out $84 million in lobbyist fees. During this time, they reduced their U.S. workforce by outsourcing jobs to foreign entities. Corporations, when acting in the realm of charter privilege, do indeed play an important role in our economy, and their many achievements can help foster prosperity. But when corporations are given human rights, the rights of we the people are destroyed. No amount of individual human effort and ingenuity can compete with transnational corporations granted human rights by the court, but without human responsibility and exhibiting no national or patriotic allegiance. Early American experience demonstrates that corporations thrive without personhood. We the people can free our governance from the shackles of corporate rule, and it is time for patriotic men and women to rise and again declare our independence from corporate domination. And I call upon you, Jackson County Board of Commissioners, to act to pass this resolution and send it to the North Carolina General Assembly. The state legislature, in turn, would send it to the U.S. Congress, from there to be returned to the 50 states for ratification, that humans, not corporations, are people, and that money is not speech. Thank you.
Thank you.
My name is Carol Cagle. I'm a property owner and resident of Jackson County, and I appreciate you listening to me speak today. My topic would be corporations are not persons. Supreme Court justices know that corporations are not people. For this simple reason, the concept of corporate personhood has never and never will be argued before the courts. Rather, the courts rely upon language ambiguity and assumption of corporate personhood in their rulings to endow corporations with inalienable human rights. By including the Bill of Rights in the Constitution, our founding fathers, who had experienced the crushing tyranny of corporate rule under English law, strove to establish a government that protected the rights of individuals over the rights of groups. Our ancestors wrote the Bill of Rights to protect biological human rights against not just government intrusion, but also to protect against corporate intrusion. A constitutional republic of, by, and for we the people is currently the best social construct which humans have to protect human individual inalienable rights. And then on a much more current note, it occurred to me this morning, something I'd like to mention to you as an example of nonpartisan participation, that being the Bipartisan Campaign Act of 2002, better known as the McCain-Feingold Act. It was originated and co-authored by Republican Arizona Senator John McCain and Wisconsin Democrat Senator Russ Feingold. This act was an effort of reaching across the aisle to craft legislation on campaign finance reform that better regulated the financing of political campaigns. Then in January 2010, as we all know, the Supreme Court, in a 5-4 stunning reversal of the nation's finance laws, ruled that free speech rights permit groups like corporations to directly spend on political campaigns. They undid a century's worth of campaign finance law designed to stem corruption in government, and it was the most shocking thing that I'd seen in my history of 63 years. 61 then, I guess. Now we watch in horror and embarrassment with our children and grandchildren. I do. I don't know about you, but I do. As the political campaign ads flood our TVs and other media, and we all know that the Supreme Court's ruling in 2010 was a huge mistake. That's why I call upon the commissioners of Jackson County to first put this on your agenda, and second, to pass this resolution calling on our state legislation to petition the USA Congress to put forth a constitutional amendment or state ratification which declares that human beings, not corporations, are persons, and money is not free speech. Thank you.
Thank you.
Federal Election Commission case in which the court defined corporations as people and money as a form of free speech that cannot be regulated for the purpose of limiting corporate political campaign contributions. Historically, the process of instituting new federal constitutional amendments has begun with grassroots organizations and groups like ours, and worked its way up the system in a very democratic process that starts with groups of concerned and involved citizens, and then continues with resolutions of local government bodies in small towns, cities, county governments, and eventually the state governments petitioning Congress to pass the amendment, and then it's sent back to the states from Congress to be ratified. All 50 states have to address the issue. And so that's why we're approaching you today, to ask that you join with us in becoming an important voice in this process that will help in returning our government back to the people and reversing the distortion of our political process created by the influx of huge sums of corporate money into political campaigns. Corporations are not people and not granted, and should not be granted, the legal and inalienable rights of people, of human beings, guaranteed under our Constitution and recognized by our Declaration of Independence. Corporation can reside in multiple states and countries simultaneously. Corporation can exist for hundreds of years. A corporation cannot be incarcerated or executed for a crime. A corporation cannot enter into a marriage contract or conceive a child. A corporation cannot obtain citizenship or be issued a passport. A corporation cannot be enlisted in the military. A corporation cannot vote in an election. A corporation has no birth certificate and no death certificate. Money is not a form of free speech, it's a form of power. Corporate money has overwhelmed our political system so thoroughly and effectively that ordinary citizens can no longer compete with this corrupting influence. Our government is no longer of, by, and for the people. Instead of one vote per person, we have one vote per dollar. Our elected representatives are all too often bound by their indebtedness to the corporations they have poured money into, who have poured money into their political campaigns. Public policy more and more reflects what is to the benefit of corporate profits rather than the public benefit. And these two purposes are very often not the same and are mutually exclusive. Disproportionate corporate influence over public policy is clearly an issue that is important and relevant to the business of local governments, including Bryson City Town Board. And so I'm submitting this resolution to you that, if passed, will go to the North Carolina General Assembly. If you pass this resolution, you'll join other local governments throughout the state who are, as we speak, considering the same action. Locally, the town boards of Franklin and Highlands have already passed this resolution. Elsewhere in the state, those we know who have passed the resolution include Asheville, Chapel Hill, Carrboro, and Orange County. We also are in the process of gathering legislative support in the North Carolina General Assembly to petition the United States Congress to pass this new constitutional amendment and send it back to all 50 states for ratification. We already have several Western North Carolina legislators who have agreed to introduce such a resolution in the coming legislative session, which convenes on May 16th. 3 states have already petitioned Congress, New Mexico, Hawaii, and Vermont. A similar petition has been introduced in Wisconsin and now the state of Washington. In Alaska, the state Senate has already passed it and is pending in that state's House of Representatives. Let's make North Carolina the first state in the Southeast to step forward in this important issue. I ask the Bryson City Town Board to put this resolution on your agenda for your next meeting and become a part of this rapidly growing movement by passing. Thank you.
I believe you said you have 3 people that want to speak.
We do.
It's going to be 2.
2?
Okay. I'm sorry, but if there are any questions, we'll be glad to address them.
I thank you for letting me speak. My name is Pat Monty, and I live in Sylva, and I'm here to express my support for this, which would be the 28th constitutional amendment. I know you folks are very busy with local issues, and you may feel this is not a local issue, but a national issue. But I would urge you to reflect further on it. Every person in this room, in this town, and in this county is influenced by their lives have been influenced by corporate lobbying. It has an impact on our clean air, water, on our health care or lack of it. Main Street banks are faced with regulations that too big to fail banks ignore without penalty. And certainly has an impact on our economy. There's hundreds of people who have lost their jobs, their health care, their homes, because of bad actions on the part of Wall Street investment banks who are too big to fail, and they have enormous corporate lobbyists in Washington. It also has, it's important for our children and our grandchildren. I'm sure there's plenty of people here who care about their children and their grandchildren. The longer this situation becomes entrenched, the more difficult it's going to be to change. So I urge you to join this grassroots movement. I think it's really important, and I hope you will put it on your agenda and pass it on to Raleigh. And thank you again.
Thank you.
Is there any reason we couldn't pass this tonight?
That's what I wondered.
Well, I didn't mean to smile like I was smirking. You're kind of preaching to the choir there. I kind of grinned when you started talking. I didn't mean that to be disrespectful. Like I said, I thought you were kind of preaching to the choir with this group here. I see no reason why we couldn't deal with it tonight.
Well, I would like to see us approve this resolution. Adopt this resolution. If we don't adopt it, we approve it. Because I believe everything they have said. And I've watched documentaries on Wall Street, on PBS, and the banks have done exactly what she said. So, and they bought elections.
I don't believe there's any reason we couldn't handle this tonight, is there?
I was going to say, for it, he's the only one who left us illegal. I can't think of
If
you.
it doesn't have the force of any law, I think you can pass it if you can.
I move we pass the resolution.
All in favor?
You better say.
Second.
I thought you already did. I'm sorry. Ladies and gentlemen, we appreciate you coming.
Thank you.